All right. Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Coach's Corner, brought to you by the Endurance Lab, where you can join us, recap the week, and answer your questions from the forum. My name's Jason Flores, one of your Endurance Lab coaches, and today I'm joined by our coaches, Ian Murray from Key West, Florida. We got Mitch Stengerman from Michigan, and our nutritional therapist, Andrea Cullen from Ireland. We do have a special guest. We'll introduce them here just shortly. But just want to thank you for tuning in today. Let me throw this over to Ian, and he's going to introduce who we have here in the bottom right corner.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Endurance Lab Coach's Corner. We've got from the Key West Hospitality Inns, our Evo Racing mini camp, and we brought in Evan Schwartz from Stryd. For those who don't know what Stryd is, which should be everyone who knows what it is, but if you don't, it is the running power meter that is being used by a lot of people to help use the data for running, similar to what we do on our bike. So we're going to bring Evan in. He's going to talk to us all about Stryd and go into really technical detail about everything. It's really science. Engineers. But yeah, so Evan, welcome to the show. We're really glad to have you on. As you know, Mitch and I are big time Stryd users, so we wanted to have you come and actually explain in real terms why we should all love this product as much as Mitch and I do. Why it's just he and I making stuff up as we go along.
Sure, that's kind of what I feel like day to day in the innovation process, but it's really good to be on here and talk to you guys.
Great. That's
great. We're going to turn it over to Andrea first because she has her horribly mean, difficult questions that she likes to ask everyone at the start just to put them on guard as we go.
I've actually been really kind this time. So, Evan,
yes.
You're in the hot seat there. So
yeah, I can turn up the temperature.
The first question is your hometown. Where's your hometown?
Well, it's interesting. Hometown is Ohio, so Midwest, Columbus, Ohio. But I moved to Boulder, Colorado, and I feel like this is the place I always should have been. I visited for the first time in March of 2018 on a fun trip with my friends for 5 days, and I said, okay, I'm moving. So then I gave my job like a 3-month notice, and I was like, I'm going to move in the summer. I just want to let you know way ahead of time. So hometown originally from Ohio, like heart of the Midwest, but like if people know the Ohio State University, it's there. But Boulder, Colorado, I feel like is my hometown. It always should have been.
I've heard it's much nicer than Columbus.
I don't mind Columbus. I just like the mountains a little bit better than gray skies every day.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah. All right, what do you got?
Number two, as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh yeah, I definitely wanted to be a lawyer at one point. I wanted to be a doctor, probably an astronaut at some point. But then when I started having more of a realistic idea, I had the unrealistic idea of wanting to be a professional runner.
Oh.
Cool. So nowhere in there was Instagram influencer. We're old school.
No, I was probably still like a Microsoft Paint influencer or something like that, whatever was in like the late 90s or early 2000s.
Nice.
Cool. So sports then and now.
Ooh, in terms like preference or what I was doing?
What you were doing when you were younger and what you were doing now.
Yeah, I think something that was great about my hometown is it was such a diverse place for sports growing up. So my parents signed me up for literally every thing, like flag football and like soccer, like American soccer, baseball. I did a bit of swimming, basketball, even though I was, like 4 feet tall when I was a kid. I literally played every single sport. And so I think that helped me get really diverse at a young age and just helped me actually like every sport because I can just turn on anything and watch it, or I can see any article and say, oh, that's really interesting. Even though I've never been, competitive at one certain sport, I can still have a really good appreciation for it.
Yeah.
Cool. And well, it sounds like you're a runner, so this might be the answer, but what sport gives you that runner's high or the equivalent?
Yeah, running for sure, but I've taken up a couple fun activities and pastimes since I moved to Colorado. Like climbing is really big here, so like bouldering. I am actually really big into cross-country skiing now because I live about 40 minutes away from some of the really nice like mountain resorts where you can just go and ski for miles and miles. And then I do appreciate frisbee golf, which is a pretty bolder thing. But I actually really like that because we have like 3 courses here. So if I'm not running, those are like the 3 other sports I think that I do
Very
for
cool.
fun and enjoyment. Because for running, for me right now, it's like training hard and like trying to improve myself. So I don't always get that like that runner's high or that expectation and that really breakthrough performance. But if I can all of a sudden get better at one of those 3 other sports, it's very easy because I'm very new to them.
Cool. This one's a bit different. Cat, dog, or other?
Yeah, I don't mind cats at all, but if they have long hair, it makes my eyes hurt. So I think that's called being allergic to them. But I actually just got my first puppy last Friday, so I have no problem
Awesome.
picking up this early
Aw.
because I've been woken up just a little bit over the past couple days. But yeah, I actually just got first puppy a couple days ago.
And what
what's
what
he
kind
get?
did you get?
Well, it's a rescue.
Awesome.
So I think that's a super big thing here in Colorado, like New Mexico, Arizona area, because so many people just dump dogs off on the side of the road.
Oh.
And so went to a local rescue. It was one that, previously had a couple infections and stuff. So my fiance and I adopted him just the other day. But they say it's a Border Collie Aussie mix, but we definitely think there's some other bigger dog in there because his paws are huge for like 8 weeks old. So his name is Leo. But yeah, we'll find out what breed as he gets older and grows into his own form.
Cool.
Eat for dogs.
Yeah, we're dog people and
Yeah.
cat people. Well, I'm a cat person too. First job.
First job, I worked as a cashier at a local supermarket. It's called Giant Eagle, so it's a pretty like Pennsylvania and Ohio and like Midwest thing. But I was a cashier, and then I was a little bit of everything at the supermarket in terms of like bagging stuff, going and rearranging the aisles to make them look good, and working like the espresso bar once, working like these different checkout places and stuff. So that was my first job, which I thought was pretty cool because I think learning customer service at the age like 14, 15 is very important for the development of a young high schooler.
Absolutely. See,
Yeah, I think everyone should work in retail once because
Yes.
people can be horrible.
Yeah. No,
So you
but-
learn what it's like the other
but
side.
Yeah, you get to meet a lot of cool people too, which I really appreciated. Just getting to see a bunch of different cases and everything. It was pretty cool.
very good.
Your university degree.
Yeah, I was a bachelor's of public affairs from the Ohio State University. I was a minor in political science, so of course I am not going to use that at all because that's what every political science degree holder does. Yeah, from Ohio State public affairs.
What was that, Ian? Was that,
I said, except me.
except
I use my political science.
Oh, he does. Ian, all of them
with
focus
a really big heavy mallet.
Yeah, he does. Or we won't have to mention all the other things Ian uses on a daily basis.
No. Coffee, tea, beer.
Yes.
Not a big beer person, which is like a Colorado no-no. I'm more of like a hard cider person. I'm drinking alcohol, but I'm a big coffee person. I had like 3 shots of espresso to wake me up right before this. So coffee. I don't mind
Excellent.
tea, but coffee.
We'll keep you on the show. That's like a crucial pass point there.
We're like, well, thank you for joining us.
Short episode for you guys today.
Most memorable Stryd customer experience or story?
Man, there are so many. One just recently, we had somebody reach out who we had helped because I work support, so like the customer service side, half to 3/4 of the time. We just had somebody email in, and they said that they have a pretty rare form of cancer that limits the type of running that they can do, and so they can't go above a certain heart rate was the way that their doctor told them originally. You can't go above this heart rate, but then they found that their heart rate was always changing so much in all these different conditions. And so once they found Stryd, they actually like talked to their doctor. Their doctor was like, oh, yeah, this kind of sounds like something you could work with, like maybe find your own personal like ability to run at to make sure you're not like making yourself more sick. So they just emailed in and said, hey, I just wanted to let you guys know, like I've been using your product for like the past couple of years, but I'm finally feeling like a ton better after, like, I can still run, I can still use your product to keep me at a very consistent level, so I don't have like asthma attacks when I'm going out, so I don't, just get too stressed while I'm out running, and it affects my, my medical stuff. So that was probably like the most recent example, but we get a lot of examples where it's like, wow, we're actually doing something day to day that's not just, selling a device. It's not, working with coaches. It's not working with all these teams and stuff. It's the individual athlete that everybody, day in and day out puts their head down, they go out and get their run. And it's just kind of like an honor for somebody like that to say, hey, you guys have made a difference in my life. And that keeps the engine kind of going. But that's definitely one of the most memorable. I could probably look back through my archives and fill up a couple-hour show with stuff like that. But yeah,
that's an amazing story.
Yeah.
That'd be a fun part of the podcast.
And
the
last question, the secret bucket list ambition.
Oh, that's really good. Oh man, I want to get a tattoo, but my fiance says absolutely no way. I also.
You're gonna take that, Evan? You need your tattoo.
Yeah. I also probably bucket list, so I know I've made it is when I can just buy a Tesla. I'm a really big fan of the electric car thing, but that's probably my bucket list thing right now. Because I drive a Honda Civic. That's just my.
Look at the Rivian. The Rivian's going to be much more cool than the Tesla.
I have heard.
Very cool.
I have a good story about a Tesla. We did a half marathon last year, and there was this woman running frantically around the car park, and she had the most beautiful Tesla, but she had run the phone battery completely down listening to a podcast while racing, and she couldn't get into her car.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Then she powers her phone back on, and she tweets at Elon, says, "How could you do this to me?" and everything. And then the FCC files some complaints and stuff.
Yeah.
Yep. That's it.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, that's probably my bucket list.
All right. Very nice.
All right.
Very nice.
Yeah. The jets overhead from the Navy base, they do
Browns.
F-18 training out here.
Go Navy. Go Navy.
Yeah.
Can't live without them.
So let's get into business here.
Let's do it.
I know we've got, so Jason has the link to my Stryd Power Center. So he use some of that data to specifically hit on things. We've been talking a lot in the last week or so about the data that Stryd has and how that gets utilized besides just the power. But to start off, can you talk a little bit about how Stryd measures power and how they do it? Because I know that's been, some people have thought that that's a contentious way to do it, while there's some other people that think, it's not direct force power, but it's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, no, totally. So the concept that I, once I started working for Stryd just a little bit over a year ago, I really wanted to take a deep dive into it, because I thought as a training tool, when I was going through the interview process, I was like, oh, this seems like a really cool idea. I had heard of people talking about Stryd in the past, but I didn't actually understand, because my background wasn't, strictly science, what all these terms were. So I took it upon myself to try and actually learn a lot about it, so I didn't seem like somebody uneducated going through the interview process. And then once I, talked to the people on the team, it gave me a pretty clear understanding of basically what power was in terms of athletics. I always understood things like running up a hill is harder, but why is it harder? I just assumed it was harder, but there's these reasons, right? Why is running downhill feel a lot easier for when you're going the same pace and stuff like that? So Stryd, instead of a bike power meter that uses typically a strain gauge, or people that are familiar with cycling power obviously know about bike power meters because they've done a lot of research before spending hundreds to thousands of dollars. But Stryd is a 7-gram foot pod about the size of a poker chip. It just sits on your shoe. It measures your foot in 3D space in real time, hundreds of times per second. And based off the exact position of your shoe and how you're moving through 3D space, it can use the incredible amount of data and algorithms that have been designed around it to take the metabolic data. If people have seen the VO2 masks, the people running on treadmills with those tubes and the masks coming out, so many of those tests, so many of those tests across all different ranges of people, to match up exactly how that foot position will translate in the lab in terms of metabolic output. And so it's the kind of cutesy term is, when you put a Stryd on, you can take the lab to the road and use stuff in real world conditions. And so instead of measuring the exact, like a strain gauge on a bike, measuring the exact force that you're putting down on the ground, because that's a very messy and tricky subject and it has a lot of parameters that kind of limit you. Stryd is a very easy solution to show you that approximation, the equation there, that can translate best to the practicality of the situation of running. Instead of strapping this huge like robotic suit on you to measure all this stuff in real time, you can simply clip the Stryd on your foot and be able to measure that very, 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 very closely. And so 100% the team recognizes that, yeah, it's using all this data that we've worked really hard on. It's not exactly the same thing because running is a very dynamic and open movement. You have to take practicality into a certain effect. So that's what Stryd does. Shows your power in real time. Does a whole lot more than that, which is something that I'm a fan of talking about more than just strictly the power, because it does a lot of really, really, really cool things. But power is, kind of that thing that people think of Stryd of when it comes to a running sensor.
Yeah, and so one of the things we talked about a lot this week, we were going back and forth with the coach. Well, three of us were, and Jason stayed silent. We were talking a lot about the different data fields that Stryd throws out there. And I've heard you talk on your podcast, the Stryd podcast, which is great for anyone who hasn't listened to it, about some of the metrics are not about focusing on the exact number, but looking at trend analysis, because the exact number is so different from every individual that you can't say you're good because you're at an 8 or you're good because you're at a 10. But then there's other ones I know you guys are still kind of playing with to see what they really are going to do for a runner over time. Talk about some of those, and I know like form power, like spring stiffness, some of those other different ones you guys are looking at.
Yeah, totally. So this is where I love to geek out because I'm constantly doing my own, I wouldn't necessarily call it research, but a deep dive into understanding as best I can, and then asking a ton of questions to our team. Half of our team has PhDs, so I can just go to any corner in our office and say, "Hey guys, can you answer this question for me?" So
when you do that, then you let them talk for 10 minutes and then go, "Now, can you say that in English?"
No, I've worked at Stryd long enough where I can know the individual people. Where if I have a certain question that I want answered to a certain extent, because I know they all know different things about the same thing, but if I want to go for the deepest dive possible, I go to Chrissy Snyder. She's a PhD from she came from Minnesota, but she can literally give a lecture for like 2 hours if you ask like a 1-sentence question. And so like if I want the deepest dive, I go to her because she's one of the smartest people I've ever met. So, and then there's other people on the staff that will maybe give a little bit shorter answer, but a very complete answer if you want follow-ups and stuff. But talking about these specific metrics, the first one that I love is the leg spring stiffness, and that's the one that people see and they're like, I have literally no idea what this is. And so the best way to explain that I've found is it's the efficiency of your lower leg in terms of how it recycles energy. So like I said, running is a very dynamic movement. It's a whole body movement. There are other forces at play rather than just, how your foot lands on the ground and pushes off the ground. There's all these things that go on with your muscles and tendons. Leg spring stiffness is a way to look at how efficiently that lower leg is working as a whole system over the course of the run, over the course of a training block, at different running intensities, at different uphills and downhills. And so leg spring stiffness is one of the ones I love. You specifically talked about, you can't compare if, I'm an 8 and you're a 10. If you're somebody that weighs a little bit more, your leg spring stiffness will be more. If you weigh a little bit less, it'll be less. But a way that we've found to be able to compare it a little bit is by normalizing it by dividing it by your weight in kilograms. And so we can find these different like percentiles that you fit in. Specifically for me, I used to be at 0.140. When you take my leg spring stiffness, this was at the end of 2018, heading into the beginning of 2019. I was 0.140, which just, if you look at that number, that's pretty average. It's right dead in the middle. And this is for easy runs all the way up to high intensity runs to some slower runs and stuff too. So it held pretty consistent for me. But what I found is that I started to tire out really, really frequently, and my leg spring stiffness would drop a ton as I was about to get an Achilles injury. I had no idea. So this isn't something that, we built into our system to be able to detect this, because injuries and all these stresses are totally different. Like, nobody's been able to say, hey, you're going to get an injury before it happens, because it's a very difficult thing. Nobody can tell that you're about to take a weird step before it happens. But what I found is, since rehabbing, coming back from Achilles injury, doing specific strengthening exercises, adding in plyometrics, adding stuff like collagen as a supplement to help with tendon strength, my leg spring stiffness has actually jumped up to 0.15 to 0.157 on my workouts, my easy runs. I'm running in the same exact shoes too. So it's not like I just switched shoes to a different brand or something like that. So the same exact shoes I was wearing, but I can specifically focus over the course of 3 months and see my leg spring stiffness increase. And that's that higher efficiency. Some of these other metrics change over time too. So my ground contact time might slightly shift down because that might be more efficient for me. My vertical oscillation might go up or down a little bit. That's more efficient for me. My cadence might change a little bit. I have a pretty low cadence when it comes to running like higher intensity. So usually in the low 170s to mid 170s until I get up to like 5K effort. That's usually when I go above that 180 number. But what I've found, this leg spring stiffness has been sort of an eye opener for me to understand that, hey, these things that I couldn't quantify before, I know I should do, drills. I know I should do, I should supplement with some stuff if that's, lacking in my area. I know I should do pre-run, post-run activation. I know I should do foam rolling. I know I should invest in, chiro or massage if that's something that's in my wheelhouse to do. But I've actually been able to see one number in front of me change over time, and that trend change over time because I wear Stryd on my shoes. So leg spring stiffness has been kind of that eye opener for me. And then you talked about the form power as well. That's kind of a combination of, LSS, the ground contact time, your cadence, vertical oscillation, all these different metrics go into form power, which is it's usually somewhere between, if you take that in relation to your overall power, it's somewhere between like 0.2 to 0.3, somewhere in there. If you're very efficient, that form power drops because it's that lack of inefficiency. So that power that's not dedicated towards moving forward. If you're a very high level athlete, you are very efficient at translating all that power you're generating into moving forward, because that's the goal in running. When you increase your speed and increase your power, is to move through space faster. So typically a higher performing athlete will have a little bit lower form power, but it's something that you can track over time. And it's something that you can say, hey, I'm able to output the same exact power, but I'm actually able to translate that power more forward, and I'm actually able to capitalize on that, that effectiveness of running, the pace that I can run via the power output. So those are a couple of the metrics that we track. There are a lot more that are, up on all our whiteboards at work, and the writing is all over the wall about how much we want to add to the system and stuff, and all the latest research that comes out. But that's a pretty good example of what we have built into the ecosystem for everybody using Stryd right now.
So one of the things, so Ian and I were going back and forth because, and I have no shame admitting this, Ian is a much better athlete than I am. And I'm just trying to get back into running. And so after a few years of injuries, but one of the neat things for me is when I'm looking at the data is, so what drills, exercises can I do to actually get them to go the right direction? Are you guys working on those kind of things to put those out so coaches, athletes can really work to improve?
Yeah, totally. When we do stuff at Stryd, the thought is not to just put information in front of people. It's to collect a whole bunch of research, go through it ourselves, and then when we hope to present people that have decided to use Stryd in their day-to-day running, we want to give them actionable data. Actionable is the whole like it's the biggest word that we throw around the office, just because it's something that we believe really strongly in. But if we were consumers of another product, we'd say, I don't just want to see numbers in front of me. That's not useful. I actually want to be able to tell something from these numbers. So that's the whole kind of mindset. And especially as we're expanding as a team and growing more mature and going forward, trying to shed that, startup label. Actionable data is one of those things that keeps us rooted. So specifically talking about the drills, we probably have a year's worth of videos and narration in terms like the effort that we've put in. It's at least a year that we've been working on a project, specifically working with local experts on biomechanics and drills. So that's a project that we hope to be able to put a little bit more work into. It's something that we've thought quite a long time ago that it's something that would be really valuable for people to have. But specifically talking about the drills, it's something that is totally on our minds, probably something a little bit later this year, early into 2020, as we want to tie it into a focus on, training plans and actual training with Stryd. We think that that's something that offers that completeness in terms of training. So it's not just, building a training plan that tells you to go run 10 miles this day. It's, hey, we notice X about Y, so you should do Z. So that's something we want to incorporate. But specifically the drills, it'll definitely depend on the individual, and that's the sort of thing that takes time. We could definitely just put a PDF in front of somebody, or just build something in the mobile app, say you should do high knees and skips today. But why should you do high knees and skips? Why would it benefit you as a runner specifically? Then once you're done doing the high knees and skips, what do you graduate to? What's the next step? And then how do you monitor that graduation? Then how do you say, okay, we need to regress a little in that training? So we want to think through the whole completeness and give people that ability to act on the data that we give them.
And we don't
So
call
can
it, call it bounding.
Bounding, yes.
Bounding.
Andrea?
Yeah, I had two questions, because this is really, really fascinating, and it's because I had in my mind it was a bunch of data, and we were a bit nervous of adding more in. But it seems to me that the information that Stryd can give you can be used as a compliance tool. So would you expect to see sort of a greater rate of progression if someone is using that holistic approach to coaching and adding in what's been recommended, that then you should see a sort of pattern with improvements?
I would say yes, but as we all know, running, you'll improve no matter what, year over year, and you'll never regress, and there's nothing that can ever go wrong with running and training, ever. But yes, with Stryd, if you talk about not wanting to add a bunch of numbers and data, my easy run day to day is with my Garmin watch and my Apple Watch, and the only thing that is on my screen besides my little music player on my Garmin is one power number, and it just shows my lap average. And I know for my easy runs, to actually be recovered, because I've been using Stryd for over a year, I shouldn't go above 245 or 250 for my personal wattage on easy runs. That helps me stay recovered. So literally the only thing that is on my watch is one number. So that is the most simple running experience that you can possibly get. When it's the Apple Watch, is actually even better. In our app, I can say, I want to run 250 watts average, but I want to have a plus 10, minus 10 notifier. So when I go above or below this window, I want it to let me know, and it'll just buzz me a little bit with the haptic feedback on the wrist. So that's something that is the most simple you can possibly do. But then inversely, if you take the Apple Watch app, you can actually have 7 metrics with different averaging fields at the same time. So if I literally want to view my 10-second ground contact time next to my vertical oscillation over the whole course of the run, next to my current power, my lap power, my average power, and then add in 2 metrics of whatever you want, you can do that in real time as well. So for somebody that wants to monitor literally everything and that improvement over the course of the run, over the course of that training block, and have these different things on their wrist, and then go into the power center or the other platform of your choice, you can do that. But for me, running is a very simple experience, especially an easy day. I just want to go out, I want to move my feet, and I want to make sure I'm not putting myself in a hole for the next day. I can do that with Stryd, just one number on my wrist, and keep it simple. But then, like you're talking about, if I do want a lot of numbers, you can totally take that upon yourself to do as well.
Cool. Wow. And that other question, you spoke about efficiency
Yeah.
and how obviously our greatest runners are highly efficient.
Yeah.
Does that, I'm probably being too simplistic in science, but could that explain, like if you're seeing someone who's quite inefficient, are they the ones we need to be looking at and saying you really need to keep on top of your calorie intake for a marathon or a half marathon because there's kind of more of a wastage of energy or a greater need? And then with the more efficient runners, we're seeing how they're more efficient on their calories or grams carbs per hour.
Yeah.
I don't know, is there a link there?
Yeah, no, that's super interesting because this is actually some research that just came out, but it's something that we're continuing to explore. So I'll answer it in a couple different ways. First being the thing that we can track right now isn't efficiency. It's called running effectiveness. And that takes your running speed in meters per second and you divide it by your watts per kilogram. And that's a very easily relatable trend. It's somewhere usually between 0.9 and 1.1. If you see, Kipchoge, or you see these top runners, their effectiveness at translating, yes, translating.
It's only because he's so small.
But your running speed versus your watts per kilogram, so that normalized power output, it follows a very, very, very similar trend with high performance. So if somebody is running, 434 pace per mile for a marathon, their ability to translate that actual speed through space over a surface related to their actual power output is very high. But then somebody that might be a pretty novice runner, they have been running for 3 months. They're coming off the couch to do, couch to 5K. They're out there running. Their effectiveness, just because their body isn't trained in all these different systems, is a little bit lower. And then talking about the next point, talking about can we identify if somebody might be under fueling, if somebody might not be capitalizing on, like you're talking about from the nutrition standpoint. There's a very interesting concept that holds true with whenever you're looking at what's called a power duration curve. So that's a very familiar thing in cycling. For running, it is a thing as well. So looking at your ability to sustain your maximum power possible for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 5 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, you have this point at which you can sustain power for a certain duration. Underneath that point is something that's, and this is a little bit technical and something that I'm still learning a little bit about, so I'll try not to butcher it, but it's called your W prime, and it's the area underneath the curve. And related specifically to running, when you look at the W prime in relation to your critical power, there's actually a point at which running past a certain duration, you start to get limited for reasons that are still not fully understood with running completely, because there's other systems going on. It's got mitochondrial density, it's overheating, it's looking at your blood capillary flow, it's looking at muscular fatigue, it's looking at, what specifically are you able to do for, your upper body efficiency, your ankle power, all these joints and tendons working in locomotion and stuff. But the W prime related to your critical power, so that ability to sustain power at a certain threshold, is specifically related to a type of energy reserve that you have. So everybody knows you can't sustain your 5K effort and intensity for a super long amount of time because you're limited. What's that limiter? There is that specific limiter, that W prime there at a specific power output. So specifically talking about that nutrition point, you can actually see, and this isn't something we support, it's that literature that's still being developed, it's that scientific research that's still being developed, but talking about specific energy requirements based off your specific power output is something that you can see off of a power duration curve for running specifically.
Wow, fascinating.
Yeah, when I started looking at the studies, and this is actually something that came out just a couple of weeks ago, there was a great article to kind of sum it up for people that don't have a PhD like myself, but in Outside Online, Alex Hutchinson posted the article about the new research into critical power and why critical power for running is related to the marathon, even though it's that intensity that's about 45 minutes to an hour, whatever your definition is, somewhere around that range. Why that relates specifically to marathon, your ability to sustain that very, very close percentage to critical power. So again, if it's somebody like Kipchoge, they can run right up on their critical power for a long duration. But then if you dip your toe over that line, all of a sudden, all those biological systems come in, and all of a sudden, those biomechanics become really important, and that ability to sustain becomes really important. And then for, a normal person, we see this at Boston. And if we can call Boston qualifiers normal people, if you destroy yourself on the hills in the first 10K, you're going to have a bad race come the later stages when you need that higher power output in relation to that pace that you dreamt of holding over the course of the Newton Hills in the last 6 miles. But there's that specific reason you're pushing above that critical power and you're dipping into that reserve that you have no idea that's there. But with something like Stryd and the power duration curve, it's something that we're able to understand a little bit more than we were in the past.
That makes a lot of sense. Like in the cycling world, we run into this all the time. People going way too deep early out the gate. They're depleting their W prime, and then the variable question is how long does it take to bring back that W prime to be able to use it again? And it sounds like that's where the studies are going, and that's essentially the question that cyclists use for all these years. How long does it take so that I can do that effort again to be able to do it later on? Yeah, so that's interesting.
Exactly. And running's complicated because on a bike, if you have that big uphill, that big sprint, but then you can just kind of coast, you can draft, you can refuel.
There's no coasting.
Running, it's like, I'll just coast downhill, but I'll pound my quads super hard. I'll overstride. I'll, just taking all this nutrition that's 100% not going to upset my stomach at all while I'm running and bouncing up and down and stuff. So, that's that little bit of complication there too, because you look at that practicality of running instead of being on a bike or in the water.
That's why I run in Heelys.
Did they finally put a carbon fiber plate in those too?
Yeah. It's lighter, stiffer.
That's great.
It's a 3 mil drop in my Heelys.
There you go.
No, and I find that interesting because a lot of time when you're dealing with cyclists, especially when you're talking about how wind affects things, and I think so that's one of the new things with Stryd has come out with their newer pod just for wind, which is fantastic, because if you're on a bike and you're going out, and when I lived in Texas, it was great. I could do 32 miles an hour out, barely working on one route. And then I was pedaling as hard as I could to go 18 miles an hour downhill on the way back.
Yeah.
Because how the wind works. But when you're running, you have a headwind, it hurts, it slows you down. And if you're running in the heat, it makes it even worse because when you run with that tailwind, not only does it really not help you, it just makes you hot.
Yes.
Because you're getting no cooling effect off you. But so if you can talk about the new Stryd pod that takes account of the wind and why that's a big deal for runners.
So for running, again, I liken it to a very simple thing. If I'm going out on my easy day, I want to look at one number. I don't want to have to worry about any environmental conditions. I just want to go get my run in. In the past, up until this current version that's just starting shipping now, just launched now, a ton of hard work has gone into bringing a completeness to understanding your environment. And so from the beginning, since Stryd was a Kickstarter and it was a little shorts clip, and then it moved to a chest strap, and then it moved down to the foot a couple of years ago, the question had been, what about the wind? It's something that you can't measure. It's something that had been drummed up by the team from the very beginning. How do we actually measure the wind via like a little clip in the back of your shorts? Well, can't do that practically. How do you measure it via chest strap? Well, we could do it, but people are going to wear a shirt. We don't want to tell people you can only have, wind measurements if you don't wear a shirt. And so just for practicality's sake, something that couldn't be done. Well, when you go to the foot, how do you measure it? Well, we can't do it right now because the technology is limited. We don't have enough understanding. We don't have enough research. So we're not going to put, a fake thing out there. We're not going to put a little anemometer on the top of the Stryd with a little fan on it. And so, it's a cool sound effect while you're running because I've run with plenty of anemometers. I will tell you that for testing. So that's drilled into my head. But practically measuring the wind is actually a very complicated thing, and that's maybe why it's never been done before. While you're running, you could have your watch pull a weather station and then be able to see maybe what was happening after, but that's something that was being tracked 5 miles away from you, meters off the ground, versus you 1 to 2 meters off the ground in your real space. So if anybody's ever run or biked before, you know how localized gusts are. You know how localized those little bursts of wind are. And living in Colorado and right at the base of the mountains, I can tell you I'm very familiar with strong headwinds ruining track sessions, or marathon pace sessions, or an easy run. But then also the really, really strong localized gusts that seemingly come out of nowhere. So the new Stryd measures air resistance, and that's something that's a little tricky thing for people to understand, because even if there isn't wind, if you don't feel a positive headwind coming towards you, you are still moving through air, and you are still moving through a form of air resistance. And this is important to understand when people are talking about the new Stryd measuring wind. It's not just a wind sensor, it's a overall overhaul of understanding your environmental conditions. Because what we do with that is we don't just measure how you move through air pressure. In the air resistance, we measure the temperature, we measure the humidity, we refine it down as close as we can possibly get right now, and then in the future, getting even closer with more understanding with what we have in terms of scientific understanding, and we start gathering all this data from people, we actually can understand more about it, because we can put our testing devices, we can go to all these different wind tunnels in different countries and different states and work at all these different conditions, but we can continue to refine it. But running through air resistance is a concept that not a lot of people understand, because even if you feel like there's no wind, it's a still day, and you are running 6-minute miles, like you're running intervals, you're still moving through 10 miles an hour of positive air resistance.
Yeah.
If you get a 10-mile-an-hour headwind and you're still moving at that pace, that meters per second through your space, you're going to have a plus 20 miles an hour headwind, which is a huge increase. You might think, oh, 10 miles an hour, like that's a breeze, like, yeah, maybe feel a little strong. The actual demand of your body to be able to sustain that same movement and power output through that space in those conditions side by side, it's an incredible amount. And then you get a tailwind. You get a 10-mile-an-hour tailwind while you're moving through space at 10 miles an hour. All of a sudden, your air resistance, your effective air resistance is 0. So all of a sudden, it feels so much easier. You can run so much faster if you put that same power output out. But if you're focusing on just moving through space, that 10 miles an hour at the same power, you can totally do that. So it's a very interesting concept to put into practice, but it's something that we've been able to take, again, from the labs and actually take it to outdoor conditions and take it to practical conditions. And it's been a super fun research project. It's been a super fun product launch and business side thing too, because we're bringing stuff to people, but it's been very, very cautious and calculated in terms of how we want to release it, because we don't want to put something unfinished and kind of like things with question marks there. So it's actually good to finally see people email in and say, hey, I got my Stryd, or see people take to social media and say, hey, it's like finally here, and then be able to see after their run or during their run, if there's a huge gust, that power number spikes, and then after their run, they can actually visualize things in the power center with the new Stryd in terms of how much percentage of that power is coming from overcoming air resistance.
So practically speaking, this should help an element of, well, a preventative tool for burnout. So say somebody it's going to be a harder session and they're going to notice that from the power and adapt their recovery, or preferably downscale the effort, the power that they're doing in that session. So yeah, wow, it's very windy here all of the time. So yeah, that's quite interesting to me.
Yeah, totally. It's something that's fun to see as well, because one, it's a new thing, so it's kind of novel. But two, if you're talking about actually understanding your training environment, and you're talking about actually understanding the effects that are going on related to your body while you're exercising, this just brings it, a step closer towards, getting that whole sake of completeness. If you're reporting to your coach, hey coach, it was super windy on the track, I'm only using my Timex watch, and for some reason I just couldn't hit my splits today, but I tried really, really hard, that coach would say, oh, it's okay. But now you can understand that, hey, it's windy, you actually put in the right output, that effort, you actually put in the right effort, And we can actually quantify that now. We don't need to say, okay, well, because you didn't hit your goals, we need to crush this long run and then all of a sudden dig yourself into an even deeper hole. So it's those sort of things. It's not just doing it so we can make a product launch. It's helping those individual athletes. It's helping those athletes that work with coaches. It's helping somebody, that has a goal marathon, but they're running into a stiff headwind the whole way. Instead of trying to go out on marathon pace when they don't understand that it's going to take a lot harder effort to push that wind, they can focus on actually setting a personal best in terms of their power output and not necessarily have to just focus on how long does it take me to complete this circuit of distance in a certain amount of time anymore. So it's that sort of thing.
And I'm a huge fan of it. I used it during the American Zoffington Duathlon this year, which I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's it is a horribly difficult run. It's a 5 mile. So I did the middle course, so 5 mile run, 5 mile run. But all the run it's 830 feet of gain for 5 miles. But all the gain is on a trail. And when I say trail, I mean just area with fewer leaves.
Right.
But it's straight up, and then you go downhill on the carriage road. And so I had to, because you can't pace that. There's no pacing.
Right.
Plus you're in the woods, so there's no GPS pacing anyways. But I had my Stryd doing the pacing, but I also was just focused on power. So I knew I had to get up these hills at roughly 300 watts, and then I could get down at 180 and try to recover.
Right.
Because, I mean, if I just tried to hold a 650 or 720 pace, I would just blow up trying to run a 720 pace up a 500% incline. What it felt like. Yeah. I literally felt like I was just like bouldering.
Right.
But so the power really helped me with that, and I found other places when I've been working with the athletes with whom I work here. Some are running here in Key West where it's oppressively hot for certain parts of the year, and I can tell a lot of times when they went out based on their power heart rate numbers and how they lined up and when did that spike comparatively for other runs in that power. So for me, the wind would be huge because it's also mildly windy down here in the Florida Keys most days. So that's going to be really nice to see that air resistance. Now, a question on that: does it account for humidity as well?
Yes. So and this is another thing. If we just put in a thing to measure the changes in pressure, that'd be good. But we actually again, for sake of completeness, we're not just going to put something out there and just say, oh, it does this. It has brand new humidity and temperature sensors, which are like the most current you can possibly have. Everything on the actual Stryd itself is overhauled in terms of bringing it up to industry standards and the most current you can possibly get in mid to late 2019.
Wow.
So all of the boards, brand new design, everything. But yes, temperature and humidity sensors, the best ones you can possibly get on Stryd, are there. And so, that opens the door for future things like, oh, what is the temperature and humidity actually, instead of what my Garmin is pulling from the, local weather stations, or I'm just guessing. I'm running through a bunch of shaded areas, so I actually can tell my conditions aren't necessarily what it's saying outside. But yes, to answer the question, yes, it counts for temperature and humidity because that's what you have to do to get the density of air pressure that you're moving through a local environment.
Because it's really fluid dynamics is what you're looking at here. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
And Jason, for you, humidity is that stuff like when it's really air can get really feel like it's thick and like they're swimming through it. Jason lives in Southern California, so he doesn't have
humidity.
Temperature range of humidity.
Kind of just the same all the time. Yeah.
No clouds.
Yeah,
that sounds terrible too.
It is. It's terrible. It's terrible.
So, may I ask some practical questions? Because we have the old Stryd sitting in a box since Kona last year when my boyfriend and two of his other friends got a great deal on Strides, and his head kind of got out of the game a little bit. Still training now. I'm very curious by it, but I'm also tentative about it. Sounds to me like you must put in an investment in the beginning to get to know your numbers and get to know the data, and that it will be really helpful and time saving and provide super information for your training, but that little bit of investment needs to happen at the start. So where do people start with that?
So if this was Kona last year, I'd give you a different answer than I'm going to give you now. So a couple weeks ago, we announced the new feature for our ecosystem called auto-calculated critical power. And so critical power is something in the Stryd ecosystem you used to have to approximate based off of a race, or you had to do a pretty painful 3-minute, 9-minute critical power test, or a 1200, 2400 critical power test. So either a 3-lap, 6-lap on the track, or a 3-minute, 9-minute all-out session with about 30 minutes recovery in between. And so that's to start drawing those little points in that power duration curve and then make that assumption. Now, what we've actually been able to do after pulling so much data, doing so much research, we actually can now auto-calculate that critical power, which is that central tenet, that central focus, that threshold that we base these different training zones and abilities off of, but it's personalized for the individual. Now all you have to do is run with Stryd 10 times. We ask for a couple different intensities, so usually something a little bit shorter, so about 30 to 90 seconds, and then somewhere in between 5 to 30 minutes, and then something above 50 minutes. And we can actually start to calculate that auto critical power curve. And in practicality, it has been out of all of the testing we've done specifically related to the Boston Marathon. We launched this as a beta the day before the Boston Marathon. We were able to have people come up to our booth and get more accurate race day goals and expectations. So what it actually did, it's 2% closer overall for everybody, just pulling everybody, all like the 250 like data sets we had from the Boston Marathon this year. Overall, it's 2% closer to what their actual ability was, just guessing based off their normal runs. And this is, I think this is an important thing too, before telling them that they should run a couple different like intensities, because Boston, people that are qualifying for Boston specifically probably are doing different types of training. They're doing a little bit of sprinting, they're doing a little bit of longer runs, they're doing a little bit of that medium threshold, but without telling them, hey, you need to target this intensity to give us a little bit more accurate guess. It was 2% closer compared to just manually what they had inputted as their critical power. So this is important because if somebody is going to the starting line and they have a goal, but it's 2% off based off what they thought their critical power was, and then you relate that in terms of percentage of their ability to their marathon power, we can actually potentially help them from blowing up. We can prevent them from going out too fast, or we can help them say, you don't need to go this low of a power at this certain stage of the race. So specifically what you're asking about, that time investment, that used to be there. That used to be the thing from the user side, especially if it's somebody that didn't have a coach and they're just getting into running and they have literally no idea where to start. It's just a bunch of numbers. It's just a bunch of complicated interfaces. We don't want that. We want to take a step back and always put ourselves in the, in the shoes of somebody that's picking up Stryd for the first time and say, what would be confusing? What would be super helpful? And we want to focus on the things that are currently confusing and make them super helpful. And so this auto CP, this auto critical power, is something that I think is incredibly helpful if you're a coach to know your individual athletes, because you could have two athletes that you say should work out together because their 10K races are about the same. Let's say they're about 15 seconds apart, but their actual critical power is different because one might be better at that really short distance stuff, one might be better at that longer endurance work. So their actual point for their threshold, which should dictate their different training intensities, will be shifted by about 10 watts. And so then you'll say, hey guys, we can meet up for these sessions, but you should, for your best improvement as an athlete, you should focus on this exact percentage, this exact session. And this is stuff that we're trying to build into our ecosystem now and give coaches resources for as we develop them. But specifically answering your question again, it used to be complicated, but now we're trying to make it even less complicated by telling you, just run with Stryd 10 times. Try and do a little bit shorter intensity, try and do that little bit medium intensity, and then if it's in your ability, have a long run, longer than 50 minutes, just to fill out that portion. And then as you keep training, we'll be able to tell how your training actually shifts your ability over time. So it used to be complicated. a lot less complicated now. In the future, we hope to make it even less complicated.
Wow, I'm being sold here, and this is helping with another question, because kind of, I don't know if a lot of people have in their minds, well, I'm going to start running, and that Stryd is something very far out there that you need to graduate towards. But it's sounding to me like it's something you should probably start with very early in to prevent the burnout, the injuries, the going too hard. Cool.
Yeah, totally. And that's our goal too, is to, over time, give people, not just people that go to Kona and they're already there. They can qualify to Kona and they can pick up a Stryd, like you mentioned, for a great deal there, or they can go to an expo and see us. Their friend will talk about it. We want to be able to give people the ability to start running, but start running more educated about what's actually going on with their runs, but then kind of hold their hand through the developmental stages, give them that understanding and help them with that, kind of breakthrough into knowing what's going on with their body, knowing what's going on with running performance. So that's something that we're very, very excited to continue getting towards. And if our team was, double or triple the size, we'd be able to roll out all these updates week after week after week, because we're a little bit limited with being a little bit smaller team. It's something that we're pretty cautious and focused of, but since I've been at Stryd over the past year plus, the development in that side has been massive. And it's just been so exciting to see that sort of focus, because as a hardware company originally, we're still great at hardware. That's always been the bread and butter, but the software side and the ability to handle customer relations really well, and the ability to start to explore different stuff, bring the mobile apps and the Power Center, the online site, overhauling all those to make them user friendly instead of very slow loading or very non-friendly towards actually understanding your runs, is something that's been that big focus, and that's the thing that excites me most.
Nice. For those same beginner users, we're looking at, you mentioned a couple compatibilities. You mentioned Garmin watches, you mentioned Apple. Are those kind of the two prime spots that we're users are going to be able to? Phone, you mentioned a little bit just there.
Yeah. So the big three in terms of specific sport GPS watches are Garmin, Polar, and Suunto. Those are the three very, very, very big brands. Apple Watch for us has actually been a super big development. We're able to use the Apple Watch as a blank canvas. The guy I used to live with that works at Stryd, his name is Reed. He did a fantastic job with the Apple Watch app, because it is so customizable. If somebody wants to use it in a certain way, they use it in their way. It's their personalized running experience day to day. But then if somebody wants to use it in a totally different way, they're totally free to use that as well. So the Apple Watch has entered, in my mind, as that fourth player. And that's something that people have been saying about the Apple Watch for years, is that look out, because once the Apple Watch becomes a sports watch, it will totally erase everybody else on the face of the market, because Apple does what Apple does. But their focus isn't, right now to provide a 25-hour battery watch. They have a little bit shorter battery time, but Reed actually did a 50K in Utah, and he was able to record with the Apple Watch plus Stryd for an entire 7-hour race, like a very very up and down ultra for him, but able to record the whole thing on an Apple Watch, which is something that people say is totally impossible to do, but you can do that with Stryd. You can make it as good or better than any other watch out there. So Apple Watch has entered as that fourth one. You talk about the mobile apps, iOS and Android. You can use Stryd. Specifically, a lot of people, as we head into winter, will start to do more treadmill running. So you can just set up your phone. You don't have to worry about having your watch guess based off the swings of your wrist, the accelerometers and everything. You can just hook Stryd up to your watch if you want to do that. But in our mobile app, it's actually a really friendly, really friendly thing. We're definitely working on more user-friendly features for treadmills. So being able to tell what incline you go to automatically, that's been something that's been a little thorn in our side, and it's still undergoing development. But when you put that incline up, your power goes up if you're running the same speed. And so that's something that we're trying to develop more. But in the iOS and Android app, you can just press a little button and it just bumps incline up a little bit, and it reports that in the app. And then something super simple about Stryd, you don't need a watch connected to it. You don't need a phone connected to it. You can just go out and go, and it'll record all the data internally for, it used to be up to 9 hours, but with this latest Stryd update, it's actually a 36-hour internal storage. We increased the size of the memory on the Stryd by 64, so 64 times the storage. So this means all this new data that we're collecting, we can collect all of it, but then we can also collect a lot more overall time. So if somebody's going out and they charge their Stryd fully, it's, we say about a 20-hour battery life, but we have tons of people say it lasts me a 25, 28-hour race. If somebody goes out to do, like Leadville that just happened, they don't need to connect to anything if they want to just look at that data afterwards, because trail running is a very, very different animal compared to normal road running or track running or racing. Yeah, and so they can just sync their Stryd out afterwards, and it'll have all that data. So up to 36 hours internal storage now. But yeah, you can just run with just Stryd. This is especially useful if it's somebody like a PT, and they're really interested in how their their clients' cadence or ground contact time or vertical oscillation changes as they work on that specific rehab. They can just say, take this little Stryd, go run with it for a week, come back, we'll sync out the data, we'll take a look at it, and then that customer or that client for that PT doesn't need to install an app on their watch. They don't need to install an app on their phone. Wow. They can just go run with a little footpod that automatically wakes up and detects when they're running, and then look at that data afterwards. So we're thinking through all these possible use cases. We want to make sure everybody could use it, not limited by having a certain Garmin watch or having a certain type of phone. We want to make it accessible to as many people as possible. So those are the different use cases.
Yeah, one
it's incredible.
I want to throw in there right before we go, because I know we're running short on time here, is that when you talked about treadmill, that's a great thing that you're trying to put in about on the incline. But I will tell you that the best thing I found my Stryd for me, when I lived in the Dominican Republic for a little while, and I had to train for a course on a treadmill, and I will tell you, 30-kilometer runs on a treadmill, really awesome.
Yes.
But the thing is, people forget that when you're on a treadmill, you're not necessarily running as hard to run that same pace you would outside. So I was using my Stryd Power to adjust my treadmill's pace to run that course, because I was able to do 210 watts at 640 per mile, but I can't do 210 watts for 640 per mile out on the road.
Yes.
Right. So then I had to either pick up the incline or pick up the pace on the treadmill to try and match what target my target wattage.
Yeah, totally. I can talk about that really quick too. So when you're running on the treadmill, you're not moving through air resistance. That's another big point to the new Stryd, is that when you go outdoors, you can actually see the difference between, some people might say, well, coach, I can crush these sessions indoors. I'm running at the same exact pace. But when I go outdoors, I just find it so hard to actually run all these intervals. Or you come, out of the winter into the spring, and you just find it a lot harder to translate that ability. Well, now we can actually understand that if somebody's doing, again, intervals at 10 miles an hour on the treadmill, and then all of a sudden they go outdoors and they're trying to do the same exact thing, they find it so much harder because you've added this extra wattage onto there, especially when you get those headwinds, especially when it's days that you haven't, crossed your fingers and prayed to the running gods that you get a nice tailwind. And so that's actually something that, again, that completeness of knowing your running environment, that is added in. And then I'll also put in a thing there. It's a byproduct of Stryd just having to be super accurate and precise for knowing your foot's motion through 3D space, is that it's an extremely accurate and precise pace and distance tool. Yes. So to be able to know how fast you're moving through space, you have to have really good sensors and really good array of data. But the byproduct of that is just being better than a GPS watch. So it's, third-party reviews for us is, people will say Stryd is more accurate than a GPS watch because you're not relying on a satellite 12,000 miles away pinging your location every second. You're taking hundreds of data points every second on your foot, a meter away from your watch, and you're able to tell exactly how you're moving through space. So for treadmills, you might go to one treadmill at the gym that you use for workouts because it feels just so much easier to run fast on. Well, it happens to be miscalibrated. It's different than the treadmill next to it. That's the reason you don't go on treadmill B, is because treadmill B makes you feel bad about yourself, but then treadmill A makes you feel really good. So something like that, if you want to just track your pace and distance better, Stryd is the best for it. And then if you
Nice.
want to, instantly upgrade your GPS watch that, might be a Garmin 920 that's, a couple years old edition, you can instantly make it better with the Stryd, giving it pace and distance. So specifically talking about that factor too.
Wow.
Treadmills, it's great. It makes you not have to guess about what you're doing, because
Right.
your treadmill says I'm going 9 miles an hour, but you're actually going a little bit faster. You're actually going a little bit slower, because it's still just measuring you as you move through space, not the speed of the belt that the treadmill says it's going at. So
Interesting.
that's another reason.
Our in-studio audience here agrees with you.
Yeah. All right. So definitely some really interesting topics we've got going on today. We covered a little bit about what the Stryd power meter was, the different values, the metrics that Stryd measures, and kind of looking into the future, looking at specific drills that Stryd will be looking at to hopefully present to us coaches to be able to help our athletes, and just kind of this holistic approach that we'll be able to look at with all this new data that's coming out there. I think with the evolution of the design, with the wind and air resistance, I think that's going to be huge. And hopefully we covered a lot of your questions as far as practical questions about where to start and that sort of thing. It looks like it's just making a whole lot less complicated for users to get up started, and just the compatibility is just wide range. So I just want to end here. Just want to thank Evan just for coming on. We've got some really great questions. If you guys have follow-up questions here in the forum, go ahead and drop them down. We'll see if we can get us all connected, answer some questions here. I know it does. I know we've got 2 users that have been using it a lot. It looks like Andrea is going to get on, and maybe I'll get. I'm a big data guy, so it's like, yes, something else other than just like pace per mile. Maybe throw this on after November, and for those 2 weeks that I run of the year. Obviously, I do run a little bit longer, but we may convince me to do it. But definitely want to look into this product. I know, Evan, you were part of the Stryd podcast. Maybe you could let people know where they could reach you at and the podcast.
Sure. So we've been putting some of the episodes on hold until this product release, because we don't want to give information that's immediately going to be invalid. So that will start back recording. I think we have like a dozen episodes, maybe a little bit more than that, but it's the Stryd Power Podcast. It's something that's just a super fun pet project of mine. You can find it wherever you get your podcast, is what every podcast says. That's just a way, if you're curious about interviews from different coaches, interviews from different people of different abilities, or you want to understand a little bit more about some of the metrics, you want to go a little bit more in depth, we give a really wide array, and it's something that's continuing to be pumped out, but a lot of different training information specifically for Stryd, Stryd Power Podcast.
Excellent. And where could they reach you if they have questions specifically for you?
Yeah, it's support@stryd.com. It'll go to any of our great support staff. We have 4 people currently working on it right now. Myself, I'm always glued there. I keep it refreshed all the time, and so if I'm working on an open case or want to answer somebody's question right away, we're always there to talk to, or on social media at Stryd Running, STRYD. RUNNING. I think that's all of our social media handles. So if you have any questions, support is definitely the best way to go. But feel free to follow us and continue to get all the great updates there too.
That's awesome. All right, I want to thank everyone else for joining us today here in the Coach's Corner. And if you like what you hear today, and we would love it if you shared it to your friends. But if you have a question, we've got a couple resources that you can reach out to. But you could always also reach out to us at coaches@endurancelab.fit. Don't forget, you could also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at the Endurance Lab, and online at endurancelab.fit. I want to thank Evan one last time, of course, the coaches for their time, and we will see everyone next week.